Imagine stepping outside into a world where winter doesn't last 3 months. It lasts thousands of years. The ground is permanently frozen. Trees are almost gone. Temperatures drop so low that exposed skin can kill you in minutes. Massive walls of ice stretch across entire continents. Food is scarce. Predators are everywhere. And you have no electricity, no heating, no medicine, no metal tools, just a sharpened stick and the skin of an animal you killed with your hands. By every reasonable measure, you should not survive. And yet somehow, your ancestors did. Not only did they survive the Ice Age, they expanded across entire continents, hunted some of the largest creatures that ever walked the earth, and quietly built the foundations for everything we live in today. So how did they actually do it? Because the answer is not what most people expect. The first mistake people make is imagining the Ice Age as one long, frozen nightmare. It wasn't. The last Ice Age lasted roughly 115,000 years and hit its coldest point around 20,000 years ago. But temperatures shifted constantly. Some regions were buried under glaciers. Others remained cold, open grasslands, harsh but full of life. Ancient humans weren't hiding from blizzards every single day. They were living in a world that was dangerous and unpredictable, but still a world with opportunities. And the real enemy wasn't the cold. It was uncertainty. A hunting ground that supported herds for decades could go silent overnight. Rivers shifted. Seasons became more extreme. Entire ecosystems could collapse within a generation. Ancient humans weren't just fighting the weather. They were fighting a world that kept changing the rules without warning. So let's start with the most obvious question. Why didn't they simply freeze to death? The answer begins with something that sounds almost too simple. Clothing. Archaeologists rarely find ancient garments because animal hides decay quickly, but we find the tools used to make them. Bone needles dating back more than 40,000 years have been discovered across Eurasia. These weren't crude scraping tools. They were precise enough to stitch fitted, layered clothing from animal fur and hide. Think about what that difference means. A loose animal skin draped over your shoulders gives you some warmth. A carefully sewn, fitted outfit traps heat, blocks wind, and lets you stay outside long enough to hunt. That gap between those two things is the gap between dying and surviving. Long before factories or civilization, humans were already engineering survival technology. But clothing alone wasn't enough. Humans needed fire. Today, fire feels ordinary. You can make it in a second without thinking. For Ice Age humans, fire was the boundary between life and death. It provided warmth, light, and protection from predators that hunted in the dark. It also allowed humans to cook food, which made calories easier to digest and squeeze more energy out of limited resources. But here's what nobody talks about. Fire didn't just keep humans warm. It kept them together. After the hunt ended and darkness covered the landscape, people gathered around flames. They shared food. They passed information. They told stories. Sitting beside a fire in the frozen dark, ancient humans were doing something that looks remarkably familiar. They were building community. In a strange way, the first version of civilization didn't begin with cities or kings. It began around a small fire in the middle of nowhere. Even fire and clothing weren't enough without shelter. And this is where ancient humans did something that still surprises archaeologists today. In parts of Eastern Europe, researchers have uncovered structures built almost entirely from mammoth bones. Circular shelters constructed from hundreds of bones stacked and arranged deliberately, dating back roughly 20,000 years. These weren't accidental arrangements. They were engineered structures built by people who looked at the bones of a massive dead animal and thought, we can live inside that. That is not primitive thinking. That is creative problem solving at its most extreme. Which brings us to the question of food. Cold kills fast, but starvation kills eventually. And in freezing temperatures, the body burns through energy faster than normal. Humans needed calories constantly. Fortunately, Ice Age landscapes were full of enormous animals. Mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant bison, cave bears, and massive deer roamed open grasslands across Europe and Asia. The food existed. The problem was getting it. At first glance, hunting a mammoth sounds completely impossible. These animals could weigh 6 tons. A single blow from one could kill a person instantly. And yet archaeological evidence shows humans hunted them regularly and successfully. Not because they were stronger, because they were smarter. A mammoth could crush one person. It could not outthink 20 people working together. Hunters used planning, coordination, and communication. They drove animals toward cliffs or into deep snow. They surrounded them, targeted the weakest individuals, and worked in silence across distances. A single successful hunt could feed an entire group for weeks. The bones, fat, and hides provided tools, warmth, and shelter long after the meat was gone. But here's the strange part. The most powerful Ice Age survival tool wasn't a weapon at all. It was cooperation. Humans are not physically impressive animals. We're not the fastest, not the strongest. We have no claws, no fangs, no natural armor. A lone human in an Ice Age winter had very poor odds. But a group that shared food, divided responsibilities, cared for the injured, and passed knowledge between generations had something no other animal on Earth had developed to that degree. Collective intelligence. What one person learned, the group could use. What one generation discovered, the next could build on. Knowledge didn't disappear when a person died. It transferred. And unlike food or fire, knowledge could grow indefinitely. What's remarkable is that Ice Age humans didn't stay still. They moved. Over thousands of years, they pushed into some of the harshest environments ever inhabited by any human population. They crossed mountain ranges, followed herds into unknown territory, and walked into lands no human had ever seen. At various points, sea levels were dramatically lower because so much water was locked inside glaciers. Land bridges appear between regions separated today by open ocean. Humans walked across them carrying nothing but tools, skills, and a knowledge of their ancestors. No maps, no certainty about what lay ahead, just a decision to keep moving. But survival wasn't only physical, and this is perhaps the most overlooked part of the entire story. Imagine living through endless winters, failed hunts, and constant loss. The psychological weight alone would be crushing. Yet ancient humans found ways to hold themselves together. Cave paintings, carved figures, decorated tools, burial rituals performed with care. At first, these things seem unrelated to survival. A painting on a cave wall doesn't provide calories. A carved figurine doesn't stop the wind. But perhaps they served a different kind of purpose. They created meaning. And meaning, it turns out, is something humans cannot survive without for long. Stories make uncertainty bearable. Art preserves memory. Ritual holds communities together when the world outside is trying to pull them apart. These weren't luxuries. In the deepest winters of the Ice Age, they may have been just as essential as fire. Then, around 11,700 years ago, the Ice Age ended. Temperatures rose. Glaciers retreated. Forests returned. The world transformed again. But here's what most people miss about that moment. The end of the Ice Age didn't just change the landscape. It revealed what humans had become. The skills built across tens of thousands of years of survival, the cooperation, the planning, the knowledge passing, the creativity didn't disappear when the ice melted. They became the engine of everything that followed. Larger communities, agriculture, villages, cities. The entire arc of human civilization was built by people whose ancestors had already learned the hardest lesson the world could teach. That no environment is too brutal if you face it together. When we picture Ice Age humans, we tend to imagine desperate people barely clinging to survival. But the evidence tells a different story. These were problem solvers, innovators, explorers. Every needle they carved, every shelter they built, every coordinated hunt they organized was a creative act in the face of conditions that should have ended them. They survived not because they were stronger than nature. They survived because they were willing to learn from it. And every time the world changed, they changed faster. That ability didn't disappear when the ice melted. You're still using it today.